Hello the internet, hello the world. Welcome back to Trek Chat. This is episode 3 coming at you probably only a few weeks after episode 2, which is a big change from the 10 months kind of distance that was between episode 1 and 2. I'm joined today by two fantastic guests. The first is Starfleet Boy. How you doing?
Hello, very good. Happy to be on.
It's always a pleasure to have you, good friend. And my second guest is someone that needs no introduction, but has worked on many Star Trek books, has been doing the Trek Files podcast for a while now, and does the Facebook Live. He's someone that everyone in the fandom knows, Larry Nemecek.
Hey, I'm just impressed that we're not talking to just any internet, we're talking to the internet. So
this is the internet.
The interwebs.
The internet.
None of those posers.
This podcast address is simply the internet. We don't just talk to any internet here.
And now it's time for the internet. Yes.
Okay. Today we're talking about, and I think it's appropriate that we talk about this with Larry Nemecek, because he's been wanting to cross over to YouTube apparently a little bit, and he's very knowledgeable.
Wait, are you
about...
secretly filming this?
Yes, I am.
No, well,
you told me.
He puts the audio on YouTube as well, so.
I know.
Well, you know, I got my Facebook Live this week got shut down like 3/4 of the way through, and all I got was a thing that said you have been reported for violating community standards for nudity.
What?
What the hell? What did you do?
I know.
What were
and
you
it
doing?
wasn't just shut down. My whole first 40 minutes of the live show and all the everybody's comments and the questions and all was totally gone. I just sat down and re-recorded it the next day. But it was like, what?
That's outrageous.
There's another one for the books. Anyway, so I hope that doesn't happen to us.
Now
I'm like really
making
sure
show,
because I'm doing this naked, so I just want to make sure that the camera is.
No, it's fine. The camera's not on. The camera's not on, so you can do trick nude. All you want.
That would be more an abomination of just laws of humanity, not decency standards.
My God.
There were some funny. Speaking of fandom, there were some funny groups back in the day, like nudist trekkers and or Trekkies and things like that. So who knows? Those things could come back in the new.
How do you recognize
a
nudist Trekkie though? Because isn't the point of it isn't a Trekkie in cosplay? If he's naked, then you don't know. Or is it like a naked Andorian?
What do
they might have
when
a
they first
tattoo.
see you? If they whip up a Vulcan greeting or something,
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
okay, I see. They got the ears. That's all they got.
and since I don't know the 90s, look at their tattoos.
Oh,
exactly.
I see.
Oh, there's many ways.
So yes, we are going to talk about fandom. Especially basically fandom before fandom in the old days, let me say. And fandom
What would
today.
the old days be considered?
Well, the old days,
years?
considering
before 2017,
young-ish, yeah, exactly. The old days is pre-YouTube. It's before 2005, right?
Oh
no,
wow, okay.
It's 60s to 80s, and I think the 90s is when things started really getting modern. But I just wanted to talk about kind of how the fan community created all of these fan magazines back in the day. And how now we've gone into this shift where new media, they've got all of these new content creators, and I really wanted to know. This is more me asking questions. I wanted to know if the craziness that we have on YouTube today, with all of these kind of extremist creators, if that existed before as well, or if the most extreme thing that we had before was just basically slash fiction.
Well, the people that did, and by slash fiction we mean like K/S, which was the little code word, for
which I think was the first slash fiction in existence, wasn't it?
Well, that's why it's called slash, because it was K/S, and that was their. Yeah, it was like, and it wasn't like, oh, let's do gay Kirk Spock, porn fiction. That's not it. It was all feminist. Here's the thing, guys, and this has been this weird soapbox of mine for the last 15 years. I forget that the whole world just doesn't know stuff. And it's partly that's a change of, and I don't mean that in a facetious way, because obviously, there's
you're
basic,
very knowledable. You have
there's basic
much
world
history
that we've all, I mean,
Trek.
like the 90s now is ancient history, so to people, in anything, But
Captain Marvel was a period piece.
yeah. Now, don't get me into comics, because comics is just full of people running around in pajama things that don't match each other, so it's obviously not real. Um, and I say that lovingly. I'm just trying to say when I was a kid, that's why I never cared about comic superheroes. I'm like, to this day, I will watch a movie, even an excellent superhero movie, and there's always that point where I go, oh, this is so comic booky. Oh, wait, that's because it is. I mean, that's just what I am. Anyway,
Right.
as opposed to Starfleet, which is really us, through our historical line, through NASA, into the future. They have ranks and uniforms and ship classes, and they talk about Caesar and Hitler and Napoleon and Lee Kwan and Colonel Green. I mean, there's a through line to history to them. So that's
Right. Up to
when I was a kid.
up to a certain point, before the 1996, one could even argue that everything was happening the way it was supposed to. You know, so.
Oh, are you going to get off on the first contact changed everything, and you can't
right.
claim to be in the prime anymore?
Well, no, none of that. I don't even like to talk about the
I feel a
timelines
headache
because it's
coming
just
on.
no. I promise. I actually hate all the canon timeline conversations because it's just that's good for scholarly discussion, but really it doesn't really mean
I
anything.
need some
for
Janeway
the,
aspirin. Excuse me here.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm just talking about how I remember in Star Trek around 96 is when the eugenics wars were supposed to start happening or something like that.
Oh, you mean no, it was 92 to 96. And then
92
Greg Cox
96. Yeah, exactly.
wrote a wonderful novel that kind of basically postulated that, yes, that was the first time we lived, where are we, 4 years? We're 2 years away from the Bell riots? I keep forgetting they're 22 or 24. Either way, we're just years away from the Bell riot. And it feels like we're creeping up to them.
That's true. That episode is actually, we recently talked about it on a podcast I do called Drunk Space Nine, and it was harrowing to see how similar, how prescient the episode was as to what's going on today.
Yeah.
Well, there's photos online. There's photos online
Drunk
comparing
Space Nine. If you like
your
to drink,
synthahol at the door.
Yes.
Okay. And then step over the ledge. When you come in. Anyway, I'm sorry, Sean. We got totally. I promise you, I would not do this. I promise you, I would not do this.
It's fine. So this is the format. Whatever. I throw the topic out there, and then we.
Well, you told me the format was 30 minutes, and we're never going to make that at this rate.
Oh well, I mean, okay. So to be honest, my format is 30 minutes, but my first two episodes are like 46 and then 52, so it's not. It's under an hour. We'll do it under an hour. That's the format.
Okay. But no, to answer your question, I forgot now what we were talking about zines and pre-internet, and what was your specific? If there was like the wacko fringe. Well, Slash. So it wasn't like people sitting down to do gay porn. It was women. My point was, women. The whole thing of early Star Trek revival. Yeah, you look at the pictures of like the Caltech protests and all that. There's guys, there's girls. Everybody loved it, but the women were the organizing force that wanted more stories. They started writing fan fiction, which had existed before. All these sci-fi things had existed before, but they were at this real low level, because basically, aside from like some one-off, you had Twilight Zone anthologies, but that wasn't continuing characters. That was considered quality science fiction on TV. Everything else was Kitty B stuff, including Lost in Space. Nobody wrote Lost in Space fan fiction. Well, maybe that one guy. But anyway, nobody wrote Lost in Space fan fiction, or Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, or whatever, Land of the Giants. Captain Video in the 50s. But there had been some good movies, but they were still, Forbidden Planet and Day the Earth Stood Still, and a few had been out there, but they were, most people think of bug-eyed monsters and B movies when they think of sci-fi movies in the 50s and 60s, and literature was still the bastion, and comic books were, oh my god, comic books, but literature, novels and short stories were still the bastion of developing, and you still had pulpy science fiction. But there'd been the first Worldcon was 1938, I think. First Fandom had been around since then, and then the war came, and then things picked up in the 50s and 60s, and there'd been a Worldcon every year since then. What happened with Star Trek, and then we'd had huge fan movements, but it was always like around movie stars and singers and bands, Valentino or Elvis or Frank Sinatra or even Bing Crosby in the beginning, and then the Beatles.
It wasn't a franchise fan.
And then the Monkees, yeah, but it wasn't. It was people, and when the people's career, whatever, got old, then all that initial fervor burns itself out, and then it settles down into joining the tapestry of celebrities. And nothing like Star Trek had been there before, really. And then right hard on the heels of Star Trek, Planet of the Apes was kind of big, and then George Lucas got his funding for Star Wars thanks to, 3 or 4 or 5 years into the Star Trek craze, he got people to give him money to do Star Wars, and now we're off and running. But people forget that in those early days, it was this thing that was huge and underground, and with the kids, like college age, and kids were the ones, high schoolers, kids were tweens, were out there doing stuff. But there were tons of adults older who were quietly, doctors, lawyers, we'll say Indian chiefs, but that wouldn't be PC, but that's the old phrase. Doctors and lawyers and engineers and scientists, and I don't think so much the first wave of like NASA astronauts, but everybody else after that, everybody inspired, by Trek. And but it was like a quiet thing because nothing had existed like this before. So you had 20 years of the establishment going, oh, those Trekkie kids, and all of that. But so that's why these women were attracted to, the bottom line was women were attracted to Spock and Vulcan culture and that sex every 7 years thing. And while I can bring him down off his, they all love Star Trek for the adventure and the sci-fi and the concepts, but the thing that got them, the women, young girls and teen girls and women, was Spock and that aloofness and that calm and reserve, and and that's what did it. But they were putting channeling their energy into, you canceled my show, damn it. Well, I'll just, even before it was canceled, Spockanalia was the first zine, and I've gone blank on her name, but there's pictures of her bringing one to Desilu and giving it to Leonard in costume, which is like, people are like, okay, this is different. And there had been zines and fan fiction in sci-fi, but it was all like original fiction. Nobody did like franchise fan fiction. If it was very sporadic.
So these are homemade fan magazines?
These are mimeographed thing. Yes. Oh, this is all the whole. So you had this whole little outposts of people did it, and they would like network at conventions, but they were still like at sci-fi conventions. And then within 2, 3, 4 years, and then the cancellation happens, and then the letter writing campaign happens, and that starts networking people. Before the internet, you were in stamps and paper days, and you network, and long distance phone calling was really expensive, so people networked, by postage, and they'd send samples of their zines and letters and ideas and just long letters, and then you'd get together at conventions and network a little bit, but you were still like this tiny little cell of who's got enough money to be able to get themselves to New York or LA or Cleveland or Chicago or whatever. But it's in the baby stages, and then you had the mail writing campaign, and that brought a lot of people out of the closet. People got united, and then people started doing fiction zines, and even in the early 70s, there was a zine called Interstat that a woman named Terry Meyer in Kansas City did, where all it was to outgrow like the letters columns in, say, Locus or whatever. And Starlog wasn't a thing yet. That didn't come along until like 76, 77. So just to communicate, I know this is going to blow people's minds, to communicate pre-internet and pre-email even, because email was like I got AOL in 95, which I think about that now. I'm like, oh my God, that feels like way late.
It's really late, isn't it?
Yeah. Even then, I mean, like, Next Generation was over before the bulk of people had. I was
gonna say, Voyager was on, or was Voyager not on yet?
Voyager was still, Voyager came on in January '95 to the public. I just know that I got my first AOL email in summer of '95. It's what's weird is I can remember, and then Facebook in September of '07, and Twitter within a year after that. Because I remember comedians at night making fun of. I remember Dave Letterman making fun of the internet and URLs and going, so what is this? I am me dot dat dit dup dap dop. Making fun of it and the audience laughing.
Well, if you watch Seinfeld, there's no reference to the internet ever. Like, the most modern thing he jokes about is the cell phone.
Oh, there you go. See? And that was the 90s. But what's amazing now to put TNG back there is that... Huh? Sorry.
He did have a Mac on his desk, but I don't know if he was connected to the internet.
I had a Mac Plus in '88. I did my first database and my first, like, fanzine local printed concordance, like Bejo's, only for Next Generation, and then had it laser printed. Ooh, that was
laser printed.
That was desktop publishing.
Desktop publishing, that's right.
Desktop publishing, yes.
That's so cool.
I looked up
that's
the
what got
author
me in the
of.
door.
I looked up the author of Spockanalia, and it's Sherna Comerford and Deborah Michelle Langsom. So those were the
Deborah
authors
Langsom.
first.
That's who I.
Yep.
And not to knock the other person, but Deborah Langsom was one. But that whole, I'll say mafia, that whole networking group early on was all women. It was 95% women that did the first convention in New York. What's his name? Oh, the dealer was like the backbone of some of the money coming in, and he ran the dealer's room. But all the rest of it. But Joan Winston, who was a CBS junior executive and parlayed that into coming out to L.A., she was on the sets for Turnabout and Truner when they got the word they'd finally been canceled. And she has her pictures. She was like a young girl. They're all flirting with her in the pictures. But she wrote that famous chapter when the first Star Trek Lives is a book that Sandra Marshak and Myrna Culbreth wrote that tried to talk about 1970, after 4 or 5 years of this Star Trek thing, but it wasn't huge, but it was enough of a money scale to sell a paperback book. The Making of Star Trek had been out, which was like the original Bible, and that's all you could get for years and years and years. The original Stephen Whitfield, although his real name was Poe, he was trying to impress his stepdad. But the original Making of Star Trek came out after 2 seasons. It wasn't even... The 3rd season hadn't come, but in the middle of the hoopla with the mail campaign, because his episode listing for like 20 years ended at the end of the 2nd season.
Oh wow!
But
I have a
that
version
was the
of...
Bible, and then but they wrote a few years later this whole thing about what is it about Star Trek, and every chapter was a different thing, and they had words for like the tailored effect, which meant that somehow by accident or in purpose they had built a layer in for all these different audiences that were out there. And a lot of them had never been approached for. And one of them was the discovery effect, which I always go to now, which was pre-internet, when fans thought they were crazy because they were the only person they know that liked this crazy show. Mm-hmm. And the minute people started to connect, i.e. network, in the ancient days, they would hitch up their horses and drive the buggy over to the next town for a convention. But when people started to discover each other, and a lot of this was female-driven, women-driven because of fanzines, because of Spock and Vulcan and writing, not just straight sex shows, but just not to go into boxes here and stereotypes, but the feminine side, the softer feminine side writing, and that's just and there were guys that wrote too, but it was overwhelmingly women. And the fanzine writing led to fanzine organizing, led to a culture around compare. I'll write a story in yours, you write one in mine. Oh, let's critique this one. Oh, this one's crappy. Oh, this one's really, really good. We all agree on that. And that culture led to people, let's get together. There was actually a little library in New Jersey across the river from New York that had one like in 70, had a meetup for a day. And they probably thought they'd get 20 or 30 people, and they had 100. Wow. So then the thing that the original guys planned for 500, and gals, I should say, planned for 500 and got like 3,000. And that's what hit the newspapers and all the media, and people were like, whoa, this dead show 3 years later had 500 people. I don't think they charged for admission at the first one. I think everything they had monetized things, but I don't think there was I could be wrong, but I know by the time of the second one they were charging, but it was like like $5 for the weekend or something crazy. And then they exponentially took off. To the 3rd or 4th one of those, they had so many people, they were over the fire code, and everybody in the main stage, they had like 4 or 5 actors on stage, and the audience thronged forward. They thought they were going to tip the dais table over on the actors. I mean, it was big but small. There wasn't a separation. And then so the media's picking up on this, and the famous TV Guide article about it, and it's the first time in mass media supposedly the word Trekkie is used.
Oh, wow.
That was 6 months later. And because the whole thing, the real world was going, what is it about this dead show that has these kids going crazy? So out of all that, Spock, Vulcans, zine writing, zine collecting, zine editing, the zine culture leads to clubs, leads to conventions. And then the old sci-fi cons are going, they're being taken over by Trekkies. And women and they're like, I'm sorry, have you read Asimov? Have you read Heinlein? I'm sorry, that's the first gatekeeping was all the old LitCon snob guys and gals going, I'm sorry, you're not real it's fine to get excited about this TV show, but I enjoy it, but come on guys, you can't call yourself a sci-fi fan unless you've read the classics. And so you had that for 10 years. So then they said, Okay, fine, we'll go off and do our own. And that's what led to the first New York Con. We'll just do one for us. And they immediately started having like thousands more people at Trek cons than they do at like Worldcon. Even. Much less smaller, 500, 1,000 people at those. And, here's 10,000 for this dead show that's been away for 3 years. And again, this is all pre-internet. You flyers and word of mouth, and you put flyers up at the bookstore, and a SACI, your world was a SACI. Do you guys know what a SACI is?
No, I was just going to ask.
SASE. Oh, this is so amazing. Self-addressed stamped envelope. Everything was for the cost of a stamp. And we're talking about when your stamps were like 6 cents, 8 cents, 10 cents, 15 cents.
Yeah.
But it's like, enclose it. You'd have a catalog or a flyer, and you'd say, enclose a SACI for more information or for our catalog. And you would send that envelope folded up with the, self-addressed to yourself, and they would stick the thing in and send it. Commercial people and fans. And then the Well Committee got started, and the Well Committee truly was the internet. Like, it's this passion. I think Rick Berman said porn and Star Trek invented the internet or made the internet grow. Because before the internet and before anything digital, the Star Trek Well Committee was organized by 2 women to get people organized because fans wanted information. How do I do a zine? Where is a store near me? Where's a convention near me? Are there any clubs near me? Hey, can I learn more about Roger C. Carmel?
How do you get access to all of this?
Yeah, all that
people are
stuff.
making
How do we
magazines, but
spread-
if you live in some sort of
Yes.
town wherever in the middle of the United States, you need to get access to this.
And there were no again, Starlog was like 76, right? And there was famous Monsters of Filmland kind of filled it in, and all the sci-fi magazines were all fiction based. They weren't set up to handle nonfiction. Interviews and articles and behind the scenes. That wasn't their thing. And Famous Monsters kind of did that a little. And some of the early things, like in the run of the show, were in there. But there was like this whole, like I'm saying, Interstat set up. Interstat got going, Terry Meyer in Kansas City. All it was every month she printed letters from people talking back and forth to each other. So it's like the original thread. Like, even before Facebook threads and Twitter streams, even before, like, what am I trying to say? FidoNet, boards, even before forum boards on paper by stamps, you had Interstat and a few knockoffs. And she went for like 15 years. And the internet did all these things in because they became redundant. But once a month, you got this like 40 half-page, she retyped at people's letters, and they would write to each other. And 4 or 5 years went by before I found it. And then I got it, and I had all these things I wanted to talk about, but they were all like background. and the movies were, by the time I got into it, it was like Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock era. And I kept saying, can we please have some Andorians and Tellarites and show the Federation at work? Can we please show some cultures? And all the women were still talking about Spock. Yeah, all the women were still talking about characters and Spock. And I was like, wow. Like, does no one talk about background? Is it all like these women talking about characters? And
so, in comparison to today,
I'll take a breath. I'm sorry, guys.
In comparison to today, where we have like all of these, because we have great content creators out there that are making, that are reporting. I'm going to say verified, quote unquote, news, as good as you can get. But we have also all of these kind of hate mongers and these people that spread misinformation, all of that. All of these rumors and what have you. Did that exist back then? Like,
there was some of that, but I think a lot of it was
kind of just invent stuff or just talk about behind the scenes drama that was happening, or like just talk about things that didn't exist?
I think Starlog did a little bit of that behind the scenes reporting type stuff, but
when they came in, the first 3 or 4 years of this really catching on and blowing up, they didn't exist, but that's why they did come along. In the summer, I remember this because we were on vacation in Colorado, and I was at a bookstore, and I was like, whoa! There was this magazine called Starlog, issue 1, and then I didn't see it for months after that because I read later that was meant to be, they were trying to get funding, and nobody would finance a sci-fi magazine. People thought all the money people, all the suits, bean counters, thought it was crazy. So they said, okay, we will suck up our costs, and we will make one, and we'll see how it does. And they made it that total 95% Star Trek issue with an episode guide that kind of gave you fresher take than all the books, the Stephen Poe's book, and then David's The World of Star Trek he did, and he finished his little episode listing till the end. And then this explosion of things all kind of happened in 76. Starlog did that issue. the giant poster book came out and now the New York Mafia was working on it, including like Jeff Mandel and Doug Drexler when they were kids in New York, and all the clip collectors. And guys, I mean, there's so many angles to this we could talk about. One of the things was, it's only been I was working at Paramount with the digital age coming along, when just to have, like, outside of photography of shows, like what the set photographers did, even to have something like a frame grab, even after we'd had, computers laying around for a few years, it was like in LA, when we first did the fact files and we exhausted the photo stock, and the hero ships and the hero sets had decent photography, but if you wanted the ship of the week or the set of the week, it was like nobody on the shows paid for a photographer to go in and get this, and pre-CGI. There's no bad Polaroid of this ship when it looked like this before it went from its original to the fourth time they stuck fins on it differently or turned it over. And if you did get to the point where you wanted to get a videotape and do a frame grab of it, it was like, okay, well, it's $500 for a setup, and then we're gonna go into our magical mystery digital machine and charge you $50 a whack off of, and then about that, like 98 was when things blew up because the Paramount lawyers sent these cease and desist letters out to every webmaster. Wow. When the big thing was like, how many frame grabs can I do myself? My site has 8,700 frame grabs on it. Oh, my site has, and there was this explosion of hobbyists, of fan guys and gals out there doing that to show off and show their pride, and that was the new passion. And they got shut down by, it's like, you can't do this because it was ahead of the curve in a gray area. It's like fan films 10 years later. But that was the hot thing on the cutting edge. And early on fanzine writing, there was a legal thing about this, and people would say, Gene encouraged that because all this overlapped when Star Trek was out in the wilderness. So there were some legal thing, and on Trek Files, we've had one or two people who wanted to make a fan film in the 70s, and they would write to Gene, and he wanted to encourage them, and he'd say to whoever the Desilu or the Paramount lawyer was by then, is there some way we can find an exception for these guys? Because he's fighting to get the damn thing back, right? And all the pendulum swings, if it's on, it's off. It's on, it's off. And they're like going, nope, can't do it, because they're being lawyerly, like they have to do. Nope, it's off. Can't do this, can't do this. And it was almost the point where that's where it was like, don't make a paper trail. Like, don't ask. Just do it.
Just do it.
And Larry, then, all these things were, you say pre-digital. It wasn't just the fanzines. People were having... There was a magazine called Trek that started off as a newsprint. It was just called Trek, and it was like a tabloid size newsprint magazine. And after 3 or 4 issues, they went to like hard coated paper, stapled with a hardback. It looked like a cardstock back cover. It was heavier paper than your standard newsprint or bulk or pulpy paper magazine, like Starlog wound up starting from. And they would do like 1 or 2 a year. And the first time I walked, I had a friend take me to a comic book store, and the first time I walked in, the giant poster book number 6 had this beautiful full-color picture of D. McCoy, and you opened it up, and they had a specialty thing about all the medical props, and I about creamed my pants. And it was the issue of Starlog with, it was a Trek magazine with this beautiful full-color picture of D. Kelly on it, and I bought both of them. And the letters column in Trek magazine, which it wasn't monthly like Interstat, but it was the same thing. And I like wrote a, stupid 4-page letter, early on. But if you go back, the Trek magazine, like late in the 70s, that has the motion picture still on it for the first, if you get that copy, there is like a 2-column long letter from a very young Ronald D. Moore in it, being very fanish.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Anyway, I will take a breath. Here I go, guys. I haven't talked about this stuff in ages, so it's just like all of this stuff is like, this is what was happening. And if you like start looking at any one thing, you start with zines, but then you get to fiction, and you got the nonfiction zines, which was like the minority that I wanted to do. And that's how I met Jeff Mandel in New York. I was so envious of them being in New York for the cons, but also that group that had the stills collection. Before I started to say, before you could go frame grab, even in the 90s, before you could frame grab, the currency for researchers. I mean, the fangirls and fan ladies wanted, pictures of Spock and Kirk and Spock and Kirk and all that. And we all were the ones that had like, oh, here's the Romulan neutral zone slide. Oh, here's the air pressure gauge that they kept redressing for 3 different uses. The hangar bay, the hangar deck, pressurization gauge. No, it's the thing in sick bay for when they try to, suffocate Kirk in Space Seed. No, it's in Journey to Babel when they just take off on the they meet at the door. All those kinds of slides, and then much less good ship shots of the Enterprise and all the other shit. All that stuff was what we were after. And then I was collecting McCoy things too.
As far as
all that stuff was current. The film clips that Lincoln, that Gene and Majo used to sell to people, that was like gold. And there was a zine called the Clipper Ship Collector for collectors of zines. And if you had a shot of it's a bridge shot and it's like Uhura on the bridge, but you had no idea what show it was from. They had like a guy, it was kind of like stamps used to be, where they were like, okay, what is Uhura's hairstyle? What is her earring? What is the design on the panel behind her?
Oh my God, and they could find which season or which
and then you could track what episode it was. Yeah.
That's amazing.
But that was all paper and ink, mimeograph, zine stuff in the 70s. But
you had to physically go to a convention or physically go to somewhere where this was happening, like a comic book store or something.
Yes.
You had to physically go to somewhere.
Or, as that happened, I mentioned the Well Committee. I'm hopscotching around, sorry. As the Well Committee got going, they started putting out pamphlets about how to start a club, how to start a zine, how to do a convention, all these things. And the biggest thing they did was a booklet called The Yellow Pages of Fandom. And it was originally on yellow pages. The ones I remember were later on blue. But they had these lists. They had all the actors' fan clubs, and we're talking paper and stamp, write to them, get their newsletter, get their photo, get their freebies, get their patch, all that, get their stickers. The actors' fan clubs, the fan clubs that were existing, that were out there, all the zines that were known and what they were about. Were they, fiction? Were they nonfiction? What are they, were they a combination? And the addresses, how to write to get to them, who the editors were. All the known stores that sold Star Trek stuff, like Lincoln, but then also like New Eye Studio and Federation Trading Post, and I've just gone blank on the one that was both sides. Yeah, Federation Trading Post, the one that Doug worked at the New York store, and they had one in San Francisco. And then local people, and a lot of the dealers that would go around to conventions would get their address in there, so you actually knew where to get them when they weren't at a con. And all this information, and then local clubs, everybody that by state and by foreign country. So if you were some kid that just stumbled into this, having your own little discovery effect, I don't mean the show, I mean you were discovering that there were others like you would go, oh my God, and oh look, there's a club here across town from me, or there's a club an hour away, and you would write and call. And that is how things went viral in the 70s, gradually hitting critical mass and going on, before you could do it online. That's basically how fandom went from 1968 and 69, 70 to this growing movement went from this, in mainstream eyes, went from this crazy kooky oddity to the point where you had this convention for a dead show, got 5,000 people. Oh my God, the next year they had 10,000 people? Are you kidding me? And in the middle of all this, you had Franz Joseph doing the blueprints in San Diego, selling them, and they didn't register on the bestseller list because they were in a pouch, they weren't bound. So he does the tech manual, and then the tech manual is the #1 nonfiction book for 12 or 16 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. And that is when people started to go, well, these crazy kids have money. And that's helped legitimize things. And that's when you started really seeing the studio, because you could quantify it. And that's when you started having the back and forth.
So the studio must have been a bit worried about all of this, because none of this was legal?
See, nobody... Well, licensing wasn't a thing.
It's kind of like mixtapes, how
until Bicentennial, until Star Wars, licensing was not a... Yeah, I'm saying licensing wasn't really a thing. It wasn't like people were patrolling around looking for knockoffs until Star Wars.
So no one was really protecting their IP.
Think of this. In the 70s, people were just like... Desi, look, they offered to sell the rights to Gene for $500,000 in 69 or whatever it was. and he couldn't raise the cash, or he could have been a George Lucas, but he lost out. And they loaned out the Enterprise, that ship from that dead show. There was one exhibition. There was a museum in Phoenix in Arizona. We had a story about it in the Old Communicator magazine I used to edit, the official magazine. There was a guy in Arizona that they sent the Enterprise and some of the sidebar ships and things to him, and they had this exhibition for a few weeks. And when it was done, this was like a lot like when everything imploded in 2006, when the Viacom divorce happened, and everybody in charge of Star Trek technically didn't care and didn't know what they had, suddenly, because it was now a CBS thing, and there was this big vacuum between Paramount and CBS, and Star Trek was dead. We wouldn't see new Star Trek for 10 or 20 years, so who cared about all this old shit? Technically. And it's taking up space, and we're paying the rental on the storage. Get rid of this stuff. And that was the impetus behind the Christie's auction in 06.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is, in 69, there was a guy who had in the works to have it come. Well, they didn't know that the show would be dead. So when it was Paramount, barely Paramount by then, had just bought Desilu. When Paramount said all this stuff to them, it was almost like if those people had never sent it back, nobody at the building had any clue to know to ask for it back. I mean, it's one of those situations. It's like there was the same way. There was a museum here in LA that had a ton of like costumes and some small props, mainly costumes. It's the same museum that used to have the Cheers bar set, the original Cheers bar set. And they had some pieces. They had some transporter consoles and some consoles from like early movie pieces that by 2005 were kind of old and dated, and they weren't even being used on the show anymore. They were kind of like banged up. But they had them, and they made a display, and they had costumes. And it's like when there's a coup in a government, and everything turns over, and the new people don't know what there is. And it's like the people with the exhibit who were some fans in one of the clubs around, they were like, we're trying to find out who to send the stuff back to. I'm like, why? Just shut up. Let them come find you.
We need a quantum archive for Star Trek stuff.
So, we used to have that. It was called partly it was called the Experience in Vegas. But what I'm saying is, in '69, things were so, but it took only about a year because the local stations, this one guy, Dick Block, who I keep meaning to go out and interview, he's like retired. He, like in second season, went, oh my God, this is perfect for kids. It's being wasted on primetime TV. If I ran this after school, daily after school, we would clean up. And he got it on, he owned, I forget what chain it was. They had 5 stations, like LA, Cleveland, New York, somewhere. And he bought it, and they started running it in fall of '69. They started running it, and the ratings for these local stations went like through the roof compared to what they'd been running. Like old movies or whatever. Old syndicated game shows, who knows what it was. But their ratings were like 100% more, 200% more than they were the quarter before and the year before. And so they go to, the national trade shows for syndication in local stations. And these guys are going, oh my God, we're doing this. And people are like hearing it. It's all getting networked around. And everybody else is like, what? And this is only 5 markets. So everybody, every Tom, Dick, and Harry Little, and before chains owned every local station, when they were all still mom and pop local stations, who was going to be the first one in a market to get Star Trek and show it after school? Because it was like easy gravy money, for Des Moines and for Fargo and for, Provo and for Oklahoma City.
Star Trek was after school, the original series. That's how I was watching it when I was a kid too. Yeah,
all absolutely. And into the 80s even. Mm-hmm. But that was the other thing. When you started seeing Star Trek get monitored, when the tech manual was on the bestseller #1 New York Times list for 16 weeks.
That was the one with the. It's black with red lettering and the UFP symbol on the cover with the faces instead of the leaves, instead of the laurels, right?
Well, that was his. Yeah, that was his seal. Yeah, and originally he had Gene's approval to do the ship blueprints, and then by the time he did this, Ballantine was like the licensing publisher for nonfiction, and Bantam was the fiction, because they've been having the James Blish novelizations of all the episodes had been done by Bantam, and then Alan Dean Foster did novelizations of the animateds, and they were all and they were the Star Trek Lives book that they wrote about why Fandom blew up. The 2 women that wrote that, Marshak and Culbreth, who were big fanzine editors and writers themselves. And then Joan Winston, who had been the CBS person that was there at the end, she wrote her chapter in there about her week on the set in '69 when they got canceled. And then after the New York conventions went down, she wrote a book of just about the New York conventions called what was it called? The Making of the Star Trek Conventions, or How I Threw a Party for 50,000 of My Closest Friends. And it was all about the making of the 4 and 5 of those before the group split up.
So it's very different, isn't it? It's very, very different how these fans had so much impact on the culture that is Star Trek and that is fandom back in the day.
And it wouldn't be
Whereas
there
today,
if not for
the
them,
content creators that we are, the content creators that we are today, we just, I suppose, just make videos, just react to kind of what we're seeing. Whereas these guys were out there, like, really making things, creating these things. The movement.
Well, there are Star Trek content creators that do that kind of thing on YouTube. I think the Traxpertise channel, and then Ketwalski does a couple of videos that are like more deep dives and stuff like that. I've seen some of that, but not a lot.
Connect the dots type things, which is
right.
The whole point. And remember, this is, you're saying, okay, so we had the animated series for a couple of years, which was wonderful. A lot of people, a lot of fans, and we found the letters in the Trek Files, we'll do some shows on them. A lot of fans did not like the animated series because they thought it was going to be the cheap, pat on the head answer to fandom demands.
I'm baffled by that.
Huh?
I'm baffled by that. I think the animated series is great.
Well, no, listen, be in the moment, be in the time. Here's people that are pissed in '69. They're pissed that they couldn't get the show back. And they're doing more, the organizing and the demand, the whole point. There's a dual-edged point to fandom early on. Of course, people want to enjoy the shows. The shows ended. So it's like, well, damn it, if you're not going to give me new Star Trek, I'll make my own. And most of the time that took the place of writing stories, fiction, or, scripts even, or whatever. But for a lot of people, that was also, wait a minute, we never went to Andoria. We never went to Teller. I want to know what they look like. I want to know how does the Federation really work? What is the council? How many are on the council? I mean, how does a Vulcan neck pinch really work? And all the background fill the gaps and they were huge gaps, right? So, and what's the history between the eugenics wars and Kirk and Spock? What happens in the middle of all that? And they talk about the Romulan War 100 years earlier. What did that look like? And they really didn't have ship-to-ship. I mean, all of that stuff were huge yawning chasms that people wanted to fill in. And at the time, you didn't think there'd be any more Trek, so everybody jumped in and did their own versions, their own fill-ins of history, which is my first thing. My really first thing was organizing stars and planets and unifying them with real astronomy as much as possible and trying to see what that looked like.
The distances in Star Trek don't really
stellar
fit that
cartography.
either.
But the point, you can do a lot. We have done a lot, and Jeff got in and did it. But my point here is, the first wave of fandom was twofold. One, this has completely exploded my brain on whatever front, and I want more of it. And if you're not going to give it to me, then I'll make my own, damn it. Thank you very much. And whatever form that included costume making and prop building and ship building and, ooh, look, we got a plastic kit model, so I'm going to make a whole fleet. I'm going to put, here's the Lexington, the Hood, the Constitution, the Republic, and I'll do them all.
World building. Yeah, world building.
The world building,
type of
exactly.
Stuff. Yeah.
That's the term we had. Back then I didn't know, but that's what my first hook was the world. I enjoyed the characters. I liked the futuristic, the aspirational of it. But to me, that was all like, well, duh. Of course. If we don't blow ourselves up, of course that's what we'll evolve into. Now, let's move on to the cool stuff. But for a lot of people, they lived in the philosophy and they lived in the characters. But whatever it was, the first wave of fandom was celebrating that. But under everything else, it was, I'm not happy with doing my own thing. You need to bring this back and put it on screen, damn it. And that was the whole point of early fandom, or at least half the point, was to get a reunion. A TV series, a movie, or something. Because they had and we all know Turnabout Intruders hardly a finale. And so a lot of people in 71 and 72 and 73, when they heard about the animated coming, they were like, oh, this is just NBC's way of just patting us on the head and saying, here you go, kiddies. Here's your little Star Trek.
But then they had to be
even though the
some
performers were involved. Like
a lot of people were excited for it.
Right.
Yeah,
and the fact they were getting all
this is the first time something's coming back, right?
Yes, first time.
Things didn't come back. Things that are cancelled never really came back in any way, shape, or form. And this is the first. So even if it is animated and kind of, you think, oh, it might be the cheap knockoff, but it's coming back.
You did have the Brady
which is
kids.
A big step.
See, that's the thing. Part of this was you had the Brady kids, you had the Harlem Globetrotters, you had, the Scooby-Doo movies with Laurel and Hardy. I mean, you had things like that. That's why some people saw it as a sop. But Gene was like, no, this is a building block. And he and Dorothy tried to get the word out. Guys, if you it's just like now, people saying, take Discovery away and come back and do better. It's like, no. If this goes away, it will be 10 years before anybody wants to try again, if even then. See what I'm saying? That's like, no, you
Right.
don't. It's not a vacuum. You don't get to pick and choose because there's a guarantee there'll be option B in a minute. That's not the way this works. If you're tarred and if Star Trek is tarred and feathered as that thing that bombed when people wanted a new one, the binary minds of suits and bean counters is, okay, we tried it and they didn't like it. This idea of, now maybe in the geek world we have now where people say, well, this version of the Hulk bombed, maybe or this version of Spider-Man didn't do so hot, we will let it go. I mean, we're kind of there now, and I think we're there now with Star
that's
Trek
the difference,
finally.
isn't it?
But people are
That's
thinking
the
in
difference.
franchising. People are thinking back then, nobody thought. Everything was a one-off, and people only looked at like basic labels. So yeah, Gene and the core and a lot of fandom were desperately trying to say, if you don't like it, just shut up and stay home and don't vote. But don't come and trash this,
Right.
because if you really want a movie,
That's
this
great.
is how we will get there. Yeah.
Hmm.
That was all, but the first wave of fans. So all those things were both demanding more, and a lot of the, like you were saying, content creators, everything was done in a vacuum because a lot of people never thought we'd get any more. And if we did, we get, well, one movie? That can't be all things to all people. And there's even a kind of a competitive thing about, well, here's my theory on how this works. Well, here's my theory on how this. Here's my theory of a timeline. Well, here's my theory of a timeline. And then when the tech manual makes a splash by being a bestseller, then Ballantine is looking, well, what can we sell the next Christmas season? And they get Bijo's Concordance, which is like Memory Alpha on paper, which is hysterical to me because I did my concordances. Memory Alpha to me is like taking all of my stuff and then building from it and taking Bijo's stuff.
It's true. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff. Yeah, I had. I have the TNG companion, but my print version only goes up to season 5. I had that version, and then I have to go and get the newest version, which has everything.
I have a secret for you. It's been updated.
I know. I have it digital. I just have to get it on print.
So I mean, and then they're like, oh, so the Concordance sells a ton with the little wheel on the front, and then they're like, quick, we next year. Well, Jeff and Doug and Anthony Fredrickson and the New York Mafia that had the big clip collection that was being seen in the giant poster book that ran about 16 issues. It was just awesome. Including Doug going down and taking pictures of the Enterprise at the Smithsonian, which is the first time a lot of people had, that was the way people saw that. Nobody else was, mainstream media wasn't paying attention to any of this, and Starlog was barely going about the time the giant poster book was going, and if you couldn't find a poster of what you liked, you could get a Spock poster and a Kirk poster and a crew poster and a million little film clips put together in a poster from some of these outlets, and most of the time it was quasi-licensed, but it was all gravy. Nobody had a clue about licensing or a campaign. It was like, you want to sell what? Okay. Here's a deal. Do this. Okay, fine.
There were really great posters at the record store for Star Trek in the late 80s when TNG was
I'm sorry, a what
coming
store?
The record store. And mine was called Peaches and Specs. I don't know if you knew those brands.
Wasn't that a chain? Wasn't Peaches Records a chain?
Peaches it was such a great place, and you had the posters were so big, and you had to like flip through these gigantic framed kind of books, if you will, and it was
Spencer's
fun.
still have is it Spencer's Hot Topic? Don't they still have posters in the big frames you can flip through?
Oh, I haven't been to a Hot Topic, so I've got to check it out. Oh, that'd be awesome.
But
I
the
wonder if
record
Star Trek
stores were
stuff.
like the pop culture for youth because they had all the rock, all the bands were in there and the singers, and that was the natural place to segue because there weren't standalone stores for anything like this then. Maybe you'd have a comic store that was something besides just rows of dusty boxes of comics, and they were with it. But part of that's the growth. Part of that's how things evolve. Within 10 years, all of this grew up and changed, and this audience was there. And as I said, the minute there was a whiff of money to be made, it took 4 or 5 years, but you had these quantifiable bestseller, local stations, ratings going through the roof, everybody having it, which was a synergistic effect. Of course, the more stations that played Star Trek after school, the more people saw it faster than stumbling into a convention and getting a flyer with a SACE. I mean, so it all went viral in the old way, which looks like a snail's pace today, but there'd been nothing like this ever before, which was part of the problem of getting some respect and acceptance. You still had people making fun of the new thing and the fact that it was mostly kids and high school students and college students. Although within 10 years, now there are people in their 30s and people in their 40s. But everybody still felt like a lot of people felt like you would be in the closet, and you couldn't just say things to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And if you wore your Star Trek t-shirt out brazenly, you might get catcalled. But if you wore your little pin over here, if they even made little pins then, you had your little, well, we didn't have rank pips until next gen. But you know what I'm saying? You had to be, I would always try to be on the subtle side, but
discreet.
Discreet, thank you. Yes.
I had patches on my backpack and things like that, and I definitely got made fun of. So it was a different environment. Whereas today, everyone's like, "Oh, cool, Star Trek." Like,
the geeks won.
It's not quite
if very worse, it's a snobbery.
Geeks and nerds are the new cool, aren't they? That's the new popular.
Well, they're also making all the money from the digital companies that are trying to take over our lives.
It is cool now to know all of the details about, Star Wars or about the old Marvel comic books, and it's cool now to have that knowledge and be able to spread it and explain all the past and the history of these characters to people online.
Well, and they're multiplying, and their offspring are being raised with it too. So that's, now you have the YouTube videos and the Facebook, videos of people and their 2-year-old.
Oh yeah, I mean my daughter's a year and 4 months. She's watching Star Trek, and she runs around with a little Captain America in her hand. So.
Captain America. Well, they'll get it. Yeah, but my granddaughter can say Dr. Coy, so I'm trying to bring her along.
You need to get her a tardigrade stuffed animal. Those are cute.
Yeah. Well, Funko finally brought out their first couple of discoveries, but that's a whole other topic. What Discovery's been knocking on the door? Picard may be about to break down and blow the house down as far as. Merchandise and
I think Picard's going to have more of a mainstream success. So
it 100% appeals to my nostalgia. I started watching TNG when I was close to about 11 years old, and that's like a great age, where you just kind of are making your philosophy of life, and to have that as your template or whatever. Exactly. So now to me, every time the 2 episodes, it's like a religious experience almost watching it, and then I'm like, oh, what merchandise can I buy to continue this feeling? So they've got me hook, line, and sinker for sure.
But I think it appeals to non-Trekkies as well. It appeals to people that aren't Star Trek fans as well, because people know that they know Spock and Kirk, but they also know Picard. Oh, Picard. And Sir Patrick Stewart's such an amazing actor that there are a lot of people that don't necessarily know or care about Star Trek that might be pulled in by Sir Patrick Stewart himself.
Or they remember him being a Professor X from
he brings a lot more people with him now than he did when he was Jean-Luc the first time around.
And he's a social media. He and George Takei's a social media darling, but the people have had really active presences on social. Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and he's and some of the crazy, the crazy, when he's in the bathtub in the red lobster suit. He and Ian McKellen overlapping.
Ian McKellen, that's right.
Coming from X-Men and coming from Middle and Lord of the Rings and all that, and that fandom, and then it's like, well, who is this guy with him? Oh, that's perfect. So now they're the cool old guys. So they're kind of in that. Yeah, they're kind of in that role. George is a little more political and socially active, but still that whole thing of. Here's the cool elders. What are they doing now?
Right.
And not to get your point here for the show today was to be about what all that was like. It's what gets me, and it's been this last 10 years of doing the podcast and talking about this. Sometimes it's like you live this is what I keep trying to tell people, even if they came in through Next Generation or even if they came in with the Kelvin movies. It's like. Yeah, you love your first, and that's cool, and no one's taking that away from you. But as the years go by, things don't say two things. A, things don't stay stagnant because the world around us is changing. The cultural landscape is changing. The tech and the digital and the communicative way the way we watch media has changed. Witness the big protest wall about streaming. A lot of people had not even taken cable, and they were still getting by on their broadcast channels, I guess.
That's
so
my dad.
It's like being alert to and sometimes even people who don't mean to, the world changes and we don't realize it. And if something hasn't poked us for good or bad, then it's not our fault. We don't know about it unless you're like really actively, or you're in something and it's your job, or you've got kids, and you have to see the world through their eyes, their media, their world landscape. But things keep changing, and that's a challenge, and they're changing faster and faster and faster. And that includes the ways of communicate. It was such a shock the first year HBO got Emmys, and people are like going, "What? A pay channel is doing a show that gets an Emmy nomination?" It's like, well, I'll see that and raise you to the, what? The company that would send you DVDs in the mail is going to get Emmys? When Netflix started doing the first original programming. That's only been like 5, Orange is the New Black and House of Cards. That was only like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And that was like a revolution. And now it's like, oh, CBS is doing its own. Yeah, so now ABC Disney and now NBC. And they're like, oh.
Oh, I know.
So people, but all those changes happen. And to go back 4, 5, or 6 iterations, what kills me is all these things. When you look at that first wave of fandom, very few things got people excited and exploded people's brains for the good. I don't mean like scanners or something. Blew them away, melted their little brains down like Star Trek, and the reaction to it was like nothing. No, it's like nothing we've ever seen before, Captain. And all these things had to be, so there was like ridicule. People didn't know. Some people saw it as a way to make money. Some people saw it as something weird to ridicule or even be like afraid of. Is this some kind of cult? And some people and then the people within it, they wanted what they wanted. And it's like, I need this stuff. I need to make my own stories. I need to know where I can go to get more of this. More people that do like I do, if they exist. And so, like I said, the Well Committee was like the internet before the internet. It was like paper and stamps internet. There was a demand for information, and people wanted it quickly, and they wanted it globally, across the country and then around the world. And how do we do that in a paper and stamp world? That was the internet. Everything for the cost of a sacey, for a self-addressed stamped envelope. And it, and things creeped along. You got Interstat. I remember being overwhelmed because here's like 20 or 30 letters, and I wanted to correspond to these people, but it was like, and I would compose my letter. It was like a multi-level thread. It's like if the 10 threads you last talked to on Facebook, but you had to write your answers to everybody all at once and make one big post that pointed to all those. That's what it was like. And so I'd send my letter off by the deadline, and then here would come the next issue, and I'd be like, Jesus Christ, has it been a month since I sent my letter? Like, crap, this is like exhausting. But you did it because and no one else around you was like on this level because you felt like you were with this. It wasn't like anybody could subscribe, but it wasn't like the masses knew about it. I mean, I didn't get off on the fact that there were only 40 or 50 or 60 people writing in here. That's all. It's like when I got a letter talking about what I liked that was in Trek magazine, and then they would reprint those little trade paperbacks, the best of Trek, and one of the chapters was the best of their letter sections. And my letter, whatever I was talking about, a lot of these background things got put in there. Well, then I started getting letters from around the country. People would pick that up in their bookstore or their drugstore or whatever, their newsstand. And all of a sudden I went, wow, I'm not alone. There's like 8 other guys in the country that think exactly the way I do. Well, now, thanks to the internet, I know there's, maybe 8,000, if not 800.
Right.
But that's how it had to happen. And you felt like you were in. I didn't get off on the feeling I was in some tiny little ivory tower community. I was thrilled to have others. And then you would like have letter exchanges, not debates, but you would like hash stuff out because again, we were all in a vacuum. We never thought any of the stuff we cared about. We were never going to. Nobody was ever going to get paid to put this on film again, because they'd all be caring about what happens to Kirk and Spock.
And that translated to the BBSs later on in the early internet,
Yeah.
the BBS, the bulletin boards,
Yeah.
And there was that kind of activity that you described.
That was that was late 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The first modem generation. Yeah.
Right.
And I wasn't cutting edge on that. I had 2 friends that were big like modemers and bulletin board people, and they were like, Larry, there's a Star Trek thread on FidoNet or whatever it was.
Right.
And there's some guys, and they're trying to figure something out. I bet you could give them the answer. And I'm like, okay. So I sit down. They were arguing over something. And I sat down
And
and
you
said,
really did.
guys, here, I think you're both partly right. And I gave them an answer, and it was hysterical. So the next time I'm over at their house, I go check in, and it's like nobody cared. It's like I gave them an answer, and they immediately turned and were arguing about something else. And that was my first introduction to the way things would be the next 30
sounds
years.
familiar, doesn't it? My goodness.
So all of this has happened before, and all of this will happen again, to go back
Yeah.
to Ron D. Moore.
All right, I don't mean to cut you guys off.
I know we've gone on and on and on. I hope this was something you wanted to get into, Sean.
This is fantastic. Whatever. It's great.
Okay, I think that's
to be honest, I love listening to you and everything that you have to talk about. So this is fine.
Ditto.
This is great. Yeah, no. As Starfleet Boy says, it's all happened before and it'll all happen again. And so in a lot of ways, the fandom is still the same. Although I feel like now, from what you're saying, we can be heard by the producers of the show just a little more, the content creators of today. Because
I think that actually there may have been a more intimate relationship in the past, because not many people wrote letters in. Well, that's not true. I think a lot of people wrote letters into the studios, but I believe that now there's just so much pinging going on that they don't really see everything. They get like condensed, probably, reports from their social media people that say, okay,
but you get a general vibe, though.
You get a vibe,
general
but I
vibe
think
of what's going on within your fandom, or like the people that are following your content online. Whereas before, maybe it was harder to get that mood across.
I think there's a pendulum swing, or there's a speed ahead catch up cycle here too. Because like when the original series was on the air, it took a few months before people to catch on to the show, see it, and then maybe they talk about how the fan mail took off, and there's even reports that actually Nichelle Nichols' fan mail was like outweighing Shatner and Nimoy's, but they couldn't let the two stars of the show know that. Now this may be a little bit of there's some investigating needs to happen. Some of this is this just Nichelle, talking up something crazy, or is there really a record for this? But it's kind of the thing that would happen. And then like Nimoy's took off, and he had to hire an outside service because Desilu would only do like so much, and he wanted it to be handled a little more in depth. And those are the kind of things that like would be like deal points and contract points and personal ego friction bits. And you could read some of that in Herb Solo and Bob Justman's book. Those
But
kinds
as
of
you
things.
say, that took time. Those letters took time to get
But they
there.
took
Those
time for that
reactions.
to build that. And then then there are still letters. Like we had on Trek Files, we had a letter that Gene saved from a woman that saw the night that This Side of Paradise, the spores, the original spores, not the later spores, not the Discovery spores. The original spores and Spock and Layla and all of that. And the first time, aside from the crying scene in Naked Time, they gave you a hint. And Dorothy Fontana, well, she'd done Charlie X, but the big breakout script she did for Spock, and then, Journey to Babel would come after that. But that was a real landmark episode, obviously. And she wrote a letter the night she saw it, that Thursday night, and then wrote a letter that got to him a few days later. But it's amazing because it's like a bee in a bee in amber or whatever, an ant in amber, prehistoric. It's like this moment in time where this woman is saying how she felt the first time she saw This Side of Paradise, which was the night it aired, and talking about and everything she says is so exactly why everything I was saying earlier exploded about
reaction
Spock
video.
and Vulcans. Yeah, and she was like, it's like, here's the canary in the coal mine that lives and thrives, moment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a moment where, you did have those moments of contact. And then the show is down, and it's about survival and getting on with career. And, of course, he's nurturing, walking this. We talk about this in Trek all the time in the 70s. The 70s part of Gene was walking a line between moving on with your career and not looking like you're tied to the past, because you've got to move on with new stuff. What have you done lately? But at the same time, knowing there's something about this dead show that is not like every other dead show ever before in history, and it's not worth totally turning your back on, but you can't you got to be in the closet with it. You can't tell all your family, friends, and colleagues that you're doing all these things on the side to encourage this dead show that you produce, because it would look unseemly and like you're deluded. Like, nothing's ever going to come of that. Come on, like, get a little gravy, syndicate it and get a little, pennies of gravy from it. But come on, really. And there's all that. So you do have the chance in those fallow, kind of vulnerable years to do that. And then, with Gene. And then, even next gen, there's letters in Starlog, there's letters in Communicator, there's letters in magazines. And writers, let's say, would have their assistants comb through those and look for things. But it still was it wasn't interactive. It was still very one way. And then when the first boards came in and the internet creeped along, eventually you can be sure that the producers and writers had their assistants, because they sat there all day and had nothing to do but answer the phone anyway.
And now
going
Twitter provides
through
a direct link to the actors.
Yeah. Well, you're saying, and the actors hear stuff. The actors
producers.
are hearing stuff at conventions. They're getting a lot of that live. But again, that's the slice of fandom that's convention going, which is not all fandom. But a lot of times the conventions would kind of give you a vibe on things, which is unfortunate because you also had the early next gen vibe of the idiots, again, probably no more than 10%, heckling Will at conventions with all the Wesley Crusher stupidity.
Oh yeah, that's
And the first
horrifying.
time I would hear that, or I would see people writing about an Interstat, and I'm like, well, that's the idiot. He's a 16-year-old kid. Yell at the writers.
He's not
Don't yell at
responsible.
Will. Yeah, he's just doing what he's told. He's probably paranoid.
Well,
enough
he's
with-
the face of the character, and thus the face of the problem that these people have.
But we're
so-
supposedly having these savvy fans that have been in fandom for 10 or 15 years, and they're too stupid to know how TV works, and that's the kind of thing but you would have, see, that's what I'm saying. There you go, 86, 87, 88. You had aware fandom, but you also had stupid fandom then, see? To answer your
so
question.
we had those crazy people. They've been there ever since the beginning.
Don't even talk about the fans who were incensed that Spock was, when the word got out that Spock was dying at the end of Wrath of Khan. Wrath of Khan is remembered as the rosy high bar of all movies. And we talked about this on my Tuesdays live show, maybe a little bit on Trek Files. The professional marketing people who were fans who went out and did a professional marketing survey and came back and took out full-page ads in Variety, which is what you did in those days, and Hollywood Reporter, to say, Paramount, if you let Spock remain killed in the next Trek movie, you will lose 42% of your box office and you will lose 38% of your
Wow.
licensing merchandise sales. And they did a whole professional marketing survey. Would you
wow.
watch, if you found out that Spock was killed off in the next movie, would you go to see it? No. And they did all this. That's really the
Wow.
first time. Yes.
That was like pre-Doomcock type stuff.
That was not well, but it was not fakey people. It was all people who were
Right.
passionate. That's what I'm
Right.
saying. This, in our rush to talk about the Doomcocks and the toxic guys, don't ever forget that there are passion people who take their passion out of fear at times because they're worried about the thing they
Right.
love will change. And that's what happened. A lot of the anti-Klingon look Discovery fandom came out of that. It was sincere people.
I was in that camp for a
Yeah.
while.
I
I agree.
still
I
am.
know,
I
I
still
know.
the
hate the look
difference
of those
is,
Klingons.
here's what it finally got to me. When you had your gang of guys and gals, like your local club or your local circle, in your, say, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 your Trek friends, but it was the local people you knew. There's always somebody in your circle who was a little bit of an beginner, somebody who was a little
Yep.
oppositional, but you loved them, but they were face to face and you knew them, right?
Right.
So-
right. You heard their tone, you saw their face.
Yes.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
you blow that up. There's still those people out there, and maybe you don't agree. And maybe they come around. Maybe all the people that hated DS9 that now love it, and they're still out there though. I missed one show and now I'm lost. It's like, oh come on, Lost has been on since like serializing has been a thing for 15 years. Come on.
I missed like 4 weeks because I was working late and I was lost. So it was
See?
I remember, but I worked hard because like back then you could set your timer on your VCR, and so I worked hard to catch up.
My point is they're the obvious toxic idiots that are either they get
Yeah.
off on being oppositional, I forget that there's a better word than a ginner, which is like the folk word. They're against everything when I say it, a ginner. You have that in like
Is that an
local,
Oklahoma term?
I just remember when I was in news and you would cover like the people who were always against the school bond issue. No matter what it was
Gotcha.
for or how transparent it was, they were just a ginners. That's where the first time I heard that. Oh, he's just always a
Right.
ginner. He's against everything. It's like, no, let's go back to the 50s on everything. Let's
I like
de-annex
that.
half the town. That guy. But what I'm saying is, and
That
he's
guy.
that guy.
It's
But what
true.
I'm saying is, there are a lot of people that come at like I saw at Vegas. there was a guy in his full Klingon regalia. You knew he wasn't a Johnny-come-lately, and he was in his 50s, with all of his Klingon stuff on. And when they had the Klingon panel with Mary, Chifo, and Ken, and he was saying, I so much want to love this show. And it was after people had the stills and the scenes, and the promo was out there. And they were talking about, trying to ease people over if they had concerns. And he said, please I'll never forget this. He said, I want to love this show. I love you guys. You guys are awesome here in public, live. But please just tell me that the Klingons that I have known and loved for 20, 30 years are suddenly not going away. And they said, don't worry, it's going to be okay. But what he said right there, he was a living, human, breathing being. That's what a lot of fandom, and they love it so much that they are afraid that what they love the most about it is what's going to change. That's totally legitimate.
That's where gatekeeping comes from.
Aside from
gatekeeping
literary
comes
criticism, and when we rush to the obvious idiots who are like the clickbait crap, they're just wanting the whatever, or they get off on the oppositionality, the negativity, because there are people in life that get off, like the odd kid in the family that just loves stirring the crap up, right?
That debate person, the debaters, like they just take the other side. The devil's advocate,
beyond Tellarite level. Yes.
Right. It's true.
But sometimes in the rush to talk about those people, I have always tried to say, let's never, never, never wipe out. I always used to call them the loud 10%. And sometimes I would wince at the people screaming about killing off Spock in 82, or the people that yelled about the next generation. How can you call it Star Trek when it's not? The idea that there was this new paradigm universe about to blow open, and Star Trek was actually going to be bigger in the long run than what you're thinking of it being, but it was just hard to cross over that gap. And DS9 doesn't go anywhere. It's the show that stands still, and Voyager's going to be out here, and I want my aliens, I want the aliens I know. And, Enterprise is a prequel. I want to go forward. Star Trek is about going forward.
Me. That's me.
Last time I checked there, 2151 is still in the future, too.
It's true. That's true.
That's
true. Good.
But that's my
Good
point. Is it's always been there. The thing now is like the social media has accelerated it's kind of like we've always had countries fight each other, but they didn't always have atomic bombs. It was kind of like that moment in 1946 when you went,
oh my goodness,
we can't.
Trekkies now have access to atomic bombs.
Yeah.
Well, that's what YouTube and
that's
everything
it.
is.
That's how atomic bombs. The online.
But don't you think in the last couple of years, I had a Tuesday Live about a year and a half ago called, the title of it was "Who Mocks the Mockers," and I started saying, look, guys, you've got to be alert to the source. Check out accounts. Check out these YouTubers. And go back and look at what they said 6 months ago. Did any of it come true?
Yeah,
and
but then
people have to. Like you guys have come along. We've had other YouTubers come along and try to restore some sanity to the.
The audience has to kind of. We can say this. Like I've made videos about this. We have colleagues, content creators that, but they have to realize this. But and I think a lot of people, a lot of these naysayers are people that just outright angry at everything that's going on. And that was saying that, for example, Picard's going to be terrible, it's going to fail, it's going to what have you. All of these people kind of shut up when they saw episode 1, because deep down you are a fan. And even if you're very loud online and what have you, once you see the first episode of Picard, it's objectively not a bad episode. You can't just sit there and say, "Ooh, this is terrible, it's horrible TV, it has nothing to do with Star Trek." Like episode 1 is pretty solid. And I think all of these people just kind of silenced themselves and swallowed, their pride or their hate, and people have to come around on their own.
I think a lot of it comes from some of it, depending on how they react to others interacting with them. But a lot of people come at it from a sincere fear.
Absolutely.
And it's tied in discovery, and it's like you would get a blank look at the people who were worried about Picard because of Discovery, and it's the same team, and you try to look at them and go, here's what's different about it. They cannot fathom that if the name Kurtzman or CBS All Access is etched into it, how can
Kurtzman
it be
is
different?
the boogeyman for these people.
What?
He's the boogeyman. Kurtzman is the boogeyman for a lot of people. Just the name scares them to death.
And the idea, the whole paradigm that this show could be, that the finished show could be different, much less that the people involved are different. The whole birthing process of Picard. I keep saying this is the second kid in the family that had 3 sets of parents from the first kid. You know, it's like this birthing is so much smoother and by the book than the first one is. The first kid in the family was a mess, but they grew up. They're getting there. They're going to be okay. This one's going to have like an easy peasy childhood. And that's what's happened. But you could not get that across to people. And they weren't bad people, but yes, finally the proof is in the pudding. You know, it's like,
right.
Well, there it sits.
All right, I'm gonna cut you off.
That's a great place to
please,
close. Actually, that's a
please.
great note to close on. There it sits. Thank you, Sean, for having me.
Yes, Sean. I didn't
as
mean
a
to
part
go
of
on
this.
and on
This
and
was-
on there, but you guys are just such victimizable
To be honest,
sponges.
to be honest, I was expecting just to like sit here and listen. So this went exactly how I was expecting it to be. You're the one that has the knowledge and that has the teachings.
No,
So,
don't. Well, that's great, but don't make me into a wise old wizard, because what's the challenge now is to what I said about blinders and paradigms is we get lost in even when we're actively trying to keep up with. I mean, I stumbled into a thread a few weeks ago about some fans talking about, even though they were sincerely trying, how hard it was to watch original series because of the 60s-ness of it. And it's like I have to stop and go, okay, and you know, you don't react like, oh, come on, or the old, this is where it all
Right,
came from. If
right.
it wasn't for the 60s, you wouldn't be watching it today. That's all like intellectualism, which is true, but you have to approach people where they are, and part of that is, one of my comebacks is, I totally get it, but now that with YouTube, now with all these nostalgia channels, have you ever watched what else was on TV at the same time? You know, it's like, how about some context? And how about some things that can build bridges with people? And a lot of them were mostly sincere in saying, I really wanted to. I just can't do it. And I can only get through 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And it's not even the
well, I
events,
had my
it's
wife
the
do a
acting.
I did my full rewatch of Star Trek and had my wife watch all of Star Trek with me. And so we started, because she wanted to start from where it began. And so we watched all of these episodes in order. And she started with the original series. And it took a while to get through that. Because she's like, I'm going to be honest. Some of these stories are great. But like the acting, the pacing is really awkward. Because you only got one story going on at one time. You know, it's very different. Anyway.
Most of the time. Yeah, anyway. But that's a thing.
All right.
Anyway. Yes.
Thank you so much for being here and for being the wise old wizard of this episode.
Oh, stop it! I'd rather be like the Robert. What's his name? The Robert Osborne. Remember on AMC on the movie channels?
What the hell is that?
Yes.
The guy that would do
you're
the
too
interviewing,
young.
the intros. Now, Frank, there's another guy that does it because he died. But for like 20 years, he was like the interviewer that would do the raps. Was it Turner Classic Movies?
I don't know this.
I think it was, but I can't remember who the new person is yet.
I'm too young and not American enough to know
No,
that.
on well, it's on cable. It's on now. So there's a new guy that took
Okay.
his place. But
Okay.
yeah.
You've done 500 plus interviews according to the internet, so you have done quite a few interviews yourself.
Oh, you can't trust what you read on the internet. Come on.
It's true.
It's all a lie.
Well, thank you, Sean, and thank you, Larry. What a
Thank you
what a joy
both.
to have spoken to you both today.
Yeah, I hope
yeah.
this helps you cross over to the YouTubes. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Thank you both. It's fantastic.
Sean, thanks a lot.
And there you go.
And Star Trek
Live
Boy
long
too.
and prosper,
Yes.
everyone.
Yeah, truck well.